Greetings, my sisters and brothers in the love and in the light. Welcome to another session of The Law of One. Today's conversation is about the harvest, and we're going to get into a couple interesting tidbits of information having to do with the offering of the choice in polarity, service to self as opposed to service to others. Our quotes come from session 20 of The Law of One, the raw material. Understand, the original desire is that entities seek and become one. If entities can do this in a moment, they may go forward in a moment, and thus, were this to occur in a major cycle, indeed, the third density planet would be vacated at the end of that cycle. It is, however, more towards the median or mean, shall we say, of third density developments throughout the one infinite universe that there be a small harvest after the first cycle, the remainder having significantly polarized, the second cycle having a much larger harvest, the remainder being even more significantly polarized, the third cycle accumulating the process and the harvest being completed. Then it can be seen how the Confederation, shall we say, is watching to see and expecting to see a harvest at the end of the first 25,000-year period, in which a percentage would be harvestable fourth density positive and a percentage harvested fourth density negative. You may see the role of the Confederation in the first major cycle as that of the gardener, who, knowing the season, is content to wait for the spring. When the springtime does not occur, the seeds do not sprout, then it is that the gardener must work in the garden. So it's to be understood then that there was neither a harvestable entities of a positive or negative polarity at the end of the first 25,000 year cycle. And this is correct. Those whom you call the Orion Group made one attempt to offer information to those of third density during that cycle. However, the information did not fall upon the ears of any who were concerned to follow this path to polarity. What technique did the Orion Group use to give this information? Well, the technique used was of two kinds. One, the thought transfer, or what you may call telepathy. Two, the arrangement of certain stones in order to suggest strong influences of power, this being those of statues and of rock formations in your Pacific areas, as you now call them, and to an extent in your Central American regions, as you now understand them. And this we're speaking in part of the stone heads of Easter Island. And how were these stone heads? How would such stone heads influence a people to take the path of service to self? Picture, if you will, the entities living in such a way that their mind, body, spirit complexes are at what seem to be the mercy of forces which they cannot control. Given a charged entity such as a statue or a rock formation charged with nothing but power, it is possible for the free will of those viewing this particular structure or formation to ascribe to this power over those things which cannot be controlled. This then has the potential for the further distortion to power over other selves. It may be thought, how were these stone heads constructed? These were constructed by thought. After a scanning of the deep mind, the trunk of mind tree, looking at the images most likely to cause the experience of awe in the viewer. Well, did the Orion entities do this themselves? Did they land in physical, or did they do it from the mental planes? Now understand, nearly all of these structures and formations were constructed at a distance by thought. A very few were created in later times by imitation of original constructs by entities upon your earth plane. Then comes the question, what density Orion entity did the creation of these heads? The fourth density, the density of love or understanding, was the density of the particular entity which offered this possibility to those of your first major cycle. It's interesting, Ra uses the same nomenclature for fourth density negative as for fourth density positive. Both are called the dimension of love or understanding. This is correct. Fourth density is love and understanding, whether it be of self or of self towards other self is one. Now, what was the approximate dates and years past of the construction of these heads at Easter Island? The approximate date was 60,000 of your years in the past time space of your continuum. I'm curious. What structures were built in South America? In this location were fashioned some characteristic statues, some formations of what you call rock, and some formations involving rock and earth. I'm thinking, were the lines of Nazca included in this? Ra's response is, this is correct. Now, my question, since this can only be seen from an altitude, of what benefit was this? The benefit. The formations were of benefits because charged with energy of power. Alright, I'm a little confused. These lines at Nazca are hardly understandable for an entity walking on the surface. He cannot see anything but a disruption of the surface. However, if you go up to a high altitude, you can see the patterns. How was it of benefit to the entities walking on the surface? Understand. At the removal of the amount of time-space, which is now your present, it is difficult to perceive that at the time-space of 60,000 years ago, the Earth was formed in such a way as to be visible. Understand. At the remove of the amount of time-space, which is now your present, it is difficult to perceive that at the time-space of 60,000 years ago, the Earth was formed in such a way as to be visibly arranged in a powerful structural design from the vantage point of distant hills. So in other words, at that time, there were hills overlooking these lines. That is correct. The entire smoothness, as you see this area now, was built up in many places in hills. The time-space continuum has proceeded with wind and weather, as you would say, to erode to a great extent both the somewhat formable structures of Earth designed at that time and the nature of the surrounding countryside. I think I understand then. Then these lines are just the faint traces of what used to be there. That is correct. So, brothers and sisters, this is a little session on first major cycle. We're talking 50,000 to 75,000 years ago is when that occurred. And Easter Island, the heads, and the Nazca Lines developed about 60,000 years ago by thought form from a fourth density Orion entity trying to influence the inhabitants to polarize negative. That time it didn't work. But anyways, it's been a pleasure speaking with you in the love and the light. I am your humble messenger, Robert Adone. Don't forget to leave a comments, questions, subscribe, unsubscribe, whatever. Sounds good. Love you. Talk to you later. Bye.